The scent of sizzling meat drifted through the air as Harold Bennett stepped through the doors of Mason's Steakhouse, the warm light from the chandeliers glinting off the polished wood. He wasn't here for anything fancy, just a quiet evening, and a good steak. At 63, Harold carried himself with the kind of calm strength that comes from years of service. His deep brown skin was weathered by time and hardship, but his back was still straight, his gaze steady. He had fought for this country, bled for it, and had the medals tucked away at home to prove it. Yet tonight, he was just a man looking forward to dinner. He slid into a booth in the corner, nodding politely to a young waitress who hurried over with a menu. Her name tag read Chloe. She looked to be in her 20s, her blonde hair pulled back neatly, her smile warm, but Harold caught a flicker in her eyes. It was subtle, almost hidden, but he recognized it instantly. It was the kind of look you saw in people who knew something they weren't sure they should say. "Can I get you started with a drink?" she asked. "Water's fine," Harold said. "And a ribeye, medium rare, baked potato, side of greens." "Of course," she replied, jotting it down, but before she turned away, she leaned just slightly closer. "Sir, I think you should know something before you order that steak." Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Harold frowned. "What do you mean?" She straightened, glancing nervously over her shoulder toward the kitchen. "I'll tell you in a minute, just trust me." And with that, she walked away. Harold sat back, his appetite suddenly uneasy. In the army, you learn to read danger before it hit you. The tightness in someone's voice, the way they scanned a room, something wasn't right. His mind ran through possibilities. Was there some kind of health issue with the food? Was this a prank? Or was it something else entirely? From his booth, Harold could see the kitchen door swing open and closed as waitstaff carried plates out. He noticed a tall man in chef whites, his pale face flushed and his eyes sharp, watching the dining room with a fixed gaze. Harold had seen men like him before, not in uniform, but with the same energy, the kind that looked at a black man in a certain way and already had him figured out. When Chloe returned with his water, she set it down carefully. "I probably shouldn't be saying this," she murmured under her breath. "But the cook, he said something when you walked in. Something ugly. He told one of the other guys he was going to teach you a lesson with your food." Harold's grip on the glass tightened, but he kept his face calm. "You're sure?" She nodded quickly, eyes darting toward the kitchen. "I heard it myself. Please, don't eat anything that comes from him." For a moment, Harold just sat there, his mind still, his pulse steady. He had seen hatred before, on foreign soil, in his own country, in uniforms and in plain clothes. But there was something about the quiet warning from this young woman that struck him. It wasn't just about a ruined meal. This was about dignity, respect, and the fact that, even after everything, there were still people who saw him as less than human. Harold didn't react right away. Years in the military had taught him that the first move is not always the best move. Sometimes you wait, observe, and let the truth reveal itself. He studied Chloe for a moment, noting the sincerity in her voice, the slight tremor in her hands. She wasn't just trying to start trouble. This was fear for him, and maybe for herself. He leaned slightly toward her, speaking in the same low tone. "You've done the right thing telling me. Don't worry, I can handle it." Her eyes softened, but worry still lingered. "I'll make sure no one touches your plate except me," she said, glancing toward the kitchen as if expecting someone to overhear. Harold nodded. "Appreciate it." When she walked away again, he took a slow sip of water, keeping his gaze steady on the kitchen door. He could feel the heat of stares, like invisible hands pressing against his back. In the army, there was an unspoken rule: never let an enemy see you rattle. So Harold kept his expression calm, though inside, something deeper stirred. Not fear, but an old, familiar disappointment. He'd given his youth, his blood, his brothers to a country that still, in small corners, treated men like him as a target. Minutes later, the kitchen door swung open again. The chef, the same tall man Harold had noticed earlier, stepped out briefly to talk to another staff member. Harold caught the smirk on his face, the exaggerated glance in his direction. He'd seen that look overseas, usually from men who underestimated him. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a steakhouse on a quiet Thursday night. Still, the principle was the same. You don't let someone get away with disrespect, especially when it threatens your safety. Chloe returned with a bread basket, but Harold didn't touch it. "I need you to do something for me," he said, his tone low but firm. "Bring the manager over here." Quietly. Her eyebrows rose, but she didn't question it. Within a minute, a short man in a navy blue vest appeared, his smile practiced and polite. "Is everything all right with your order, sir?" Harold gestured for him to sit. Not ask, gesture. The man hesitated, then slid into the booth opposite. "I'm going to be real clear," Harold began, voice even but edged with steel. "One of your kitchen staff made a threat, said he was going to mess with my food. I don't care about excuses. I want him nowhere near my plate, and I want you to know that if anything happens, you'll be answering for it." The manager's expression shifted instantly from polite to pale. He stammered something about misunderstandings, about how things get taken out of context. Harold leaned in slightly, eyes locked on his. "I've been in places where men like him could have gotten me killed. This isn't a misunderstanding. You handle it now, or I'll handle it another way. The manager swallowed, nodded once, and got up without another word. Harold watched him disappear into the kitchen, the door swinging back and forth before settling closed. Through the small round window, he caught flashes of movement, the manager speaking sharply, the chef's defensive posture, an exaggerated shrug. Eventually, the chef ripped off his apron and stormed toward the back exit. Harold didn't move. He just sat there, his hands folded on the table, feeling the room's tension shift ever so slightly. When Chloe returned, she looked relieved. He's gone, she whispered. Good, Harold said. Now, let's eat. She smiled faintly, but it was the kind of smile that came after a scare, grateful, but still shaken. I'll take care of your order myself. As she left, Harold's thoughts drifted. He thought of his younger self, barely 20, standing in desert heat with sand stinging his skin, hearing over the radio that a convoy route was compromised. He'd survived because someone warned him in time. Tonight, that someone was Chloe, a small kindness in a world where kindness sometimes felt like a rare currency. When the steak finally arrived, it was hot, perfectly cooked, and placed in front of him with care. Harold cut into it slowly, savoring each bite. He wasn't just eating dinner, he was reclaiming the simple dignity of a man sitting down to enjoy a meal, without being treated like an enemy in his own country. Halfway through, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Excuse me, sir. Harold looked up to see a young black man standing by the table, wearing a busboy's uniform. His voice was low. I just wanted to say, thank you. I heard what happened. You stood your ground. Most folks would have just left. Harold studied. Put him for a moment. Sometimes leaving sends the wrong message, he said. Sometimes you've got to stand right where you are and let people see they didn't move you. The young man nodded, a spark of respect in his eyes. Yes, sir. He went back to work. But Harold could tell the moment had landed. Maybe for that young man, this was more than a lesson about food. It was about self-worth. About knowing when to push back. As Harold finished his meal, he noticed Chloe lingering by the counter, sneaking glances his way. When she brought the check, she slid it toward him with a quiet, no charge tonight. The manager insisted. Harold shook his head. I'm paying. And you take this, he said, slipping a folded bill into her hand. For looking out for me. Her eyes softened again, but there was something else there now. A recognition, not just of who he was tonight, but of the man he'd always been. Harold stepped out into the cool evening air, the smell of grilled meat fading behind him. The street was quiet, a few street lamps casting pools of amber light along the sidewalk. He adjusted his jacket, feeling the familiar heaviness of the night, the kind that settled in after moments where history had brushed too close. But before he could take more than a few steps, movement caught his eye. From the side of the building, the tall chef emerged, still in his stained whites, his face lit by the glow of a cigarette. The man smirked when he saw Harold, tossing the cigarette to the ground and grinding it under his boot. Well, the chef drawled, guess you think you're something special, getting me sent home. Harold stopped, his boots planted squarely on the sidewalk. He didn't answer right away. The man's voice dripped with that false casualness, the kind that pretended to joke but was built entirely from spite. You come into my place? The chef continued. Act like you own the place, just because you. He stopped, the word hanging in the air, heavy and ugly, before spitting it out like a poison. Served in the army or whatever. The chef snorted, starting to turn away. Harold's next word stopped him cold. I fought so men like you could still open your mouth in a free country. That's the part that burns me the most, that I fought for you too. The chef's shoulders stiffened. He muttered something under his breath and walked off toward the parking lot, not looking back. Harold didn't follow. There was no victory in chasing down ignorance. The victory was standing in the open, unshaken, and letting them know they hadn't broken you. As Harold walked to his truck, his mind drifted again to the friends he'd lost overseas, to the faces of fellow soldiers who'd fought beside him regardless of the color of his skin. Out there, in the dust and the chaos, no one cared about the shade of your face, only that you had their back when it mattered. The difference, Harold thought, was that war had taught him to value unity. Here, back home, some men seemed to learn the opposite. The next morning, the sunlight poured through Harold's kitchen window, glinting off the row of medals framed above his dining table. He sat with a mug of black coffee, the steam curling into the quiet air. Sleep had been light. His mind kept circling back to the steakhouse, to Chloe's quick glance over her shoulder, to the busboy's respectful nod, to the chef's partying sneer. Harold had learned long ago that some moments were bigger than they looked in the moment. They stuck to you, like burrs on a uniform, and either you picked them off or you carried them forward. Last night, he realized, wasn't just about a meal. It was about showing the people watching that they were allowed to stand firm too. By mid-morning, Harold had made up his mind. He grabbed his jacket and a small envelope from his desk before heading out. The drive to Mason's Steakhouse was short, but the decision to go back wasn't about food. It was about follow-through when he walked in. The place was quieter than the night before, sunlight flooding the big front windows. Chloe was wiping down tables, her hair tied up in a loose knot. She looked up, startled to see him. then smiled. Mr. Bennet, I didn't think I'd see you again so soon. Harold returned the smile. I told myself I couldn't let last night end without saying thank you proper. She set the rag down, brushing her hands on her apron. You already did. You left me a tip. This isn't about a tip, Harold interrupted gently, handing her the envelope. This is for your courage. Most people hear something like that and say nothing. You spoke up. Chloe hesitated, then took the envelope, her fingers brushing the rough paper. I didn't do it for a reward, she said quietly. I know, Harold said. That's why it matters. From the corner of his eye, Harold spotted the young busboy Marcus. His name tag read, stacking chairs in the far corner. Harold waved him over. Son, come here a minute. Marcus walked over, a little uncertain but curious. Harold studied him for a moment, then said, You told me last night you respected that I stood my ground. Well, let me tell you something. Life's going to hand you 100 moments like that. Some will be small, some will be big. Every time you choose to stand, someone else sees it and remembers it. That's how things change. Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes locking on Harold's. Yes, sir, I understand. Harold patted him on the shoulder. Good, now, you make sure you stand for someone else when the time comes. As Harold left the steakhouse, the bell over the door chiming softly, he knew something had shifted, not in the whole world, but in that small room, for those two people. And sometimes, he thought, that's where the real work starts. Asterisk 2 nights later, Harold stood in the low-lit hall of the Veterans Center, the walls lined with photographs of men and women in uniform, some smiling, some caught mid-march in places. Halfway across the world, the faint scent of old wood and coffee filled the air, and the low murmur of conversation buzzed from a circle of chairs in the center of the room. It was Thursday, the night the old crew gathered. Not all of them had served together, but they shared the same language, the same scars you couldn't always see. Harold nodded to a few familiar faces as he made his way inside. Frank, a Marine with a booming laugh, called out, Bennett, you're late what? You stopped for a steak on the way? The group chuckled, but Harold's smile was wry. Funny you should say that, Harold replied, settling into a chair. I had a run-in at a steakhouse this week. Thought I'd share it, because it reminded me of something I think we all know too well. The chatter quieted. Harold told the story plainly. Chloe's warning, the chef's threat, the decision to stay instead of walk out. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. In this room, every man and woman had their own version of the same moment. That point where dignity and danger stood side by side. When he finished, a heavy silence settled over the group. Then an older man named Darius, who'd served in Vietnam, leaned forward. Bennett, you know what I hear in that story? It's the same thing I heard back in '68 when I was told not to eat in a diner in my own hometown. We keep thinking, this country's done with that kind of poison, but it finds its way in through new cracks. There were nods around the circle. Frank spoke up next. But you stayed, that's the part I'm holding on to. You didn't let him see you flinch. Harold's voice was quiet but steady. I didn't stay for me. I stayed for the young brother bussing tables who needed to see a man not back down. I stayed for the waitress who risked her job to warn me. I stayed because I fought too long to let someone push me off my seat over a damn piece of meat. The group chuckled softly, but the truth sat heavy under his words. Before the night ended, they all stood for a moment of silence. For the friends who never came home, for the ones who had fought abroad and still had to fight when they came back. Harold bowed his head, feeling that same quiet strength that had carried him through battle and into this life after. As he drove home that night, Harold thought about the way Chloe's eyes had lit up when he handed her the envelope. The way Marcus had stood a little taller after their talk. Maybe, he thought, the fight now wasn't about charging up hills or holding a line under fire. Maybe it was about these smaller battles, the ones that happened in ordinary places, where the stakes weren't life or death, but pride and humanity. Asterisk, the next Sunday morning was bright and still. The kind of day when the world feels unhurried. Harold parked his truck a few streets away from Mason's Steakhouse and walked the last block. He wasn't there to eat. Inside, the lunch crowd hadn't yet gathered. Chloe stood behind the counter, flipping through a receipt book. She looked up, surprised but smiling. Mr. Bennett, she said, back again. Harold smiled faintly. Just passing through. Wanted to check in. Marcus appeared from the back, carrying a crate of glassware. Hey, sir, he called out, setting the crate down quickly. You good? I'm good, Harold said. But I didn't come to talk about me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn patch, the kind sewn onto a uniform sleeve. Faded threads spelled out a single word, courage. He set it on the counter in front of Chloe and Marcus. This patch, Harold began, was given to me after a mission. Overseas where things could have gone bad fast. We made it because someone spoke up just like you did, Chloe and Marcus. You listened, you learned, you stood in it. That's courage too. I want you both to have this. Chloe's eyes went wide, her fingers brushing the cloth as if it might vanish. Marcus stared at it for a moment, then looked at Harold with something more than respect. It was recognition. Sir, Marcus said quietly. I don't know if I'm worthy. You are, Harold said firmly. Because courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about acting anyway, when it matters. They stood there for a moment in a silence that wasn't awkward but full of meaning, full of the unspoken truth that they had all been part of something larger than a steakhouse scuffle. As Harold turned to leave, Chloe called after him, "Mr. Bennett, thank you for trusting me." Harold paused at the door. "Trust is earned," he said, "and you earned it." Out on the sidewalk, Harold breathed in the warm air. The street was busier now, people coming and going, each carrying their own small battles. He thought about the patch, about the way Chloe had held it like something precious, about the way Marcus had straightened his back. Some victories weren't loud. They didn't come with parades or headlines. They came in the form of two young people in a steakhouse, standing a little taller because they'd seen what it looked like when a man refused to be moved. Harold walked toward his truck, the sun catching on the edge of his smile. In his mind, he could hear the words of an old sergeant from years past. "Hold your ground, soldier. Sometimes that's the whole fight." He climbed into the cab, the leather seat creaking under his weight, and started the engine. But before pulling away, he sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, watching the lights of the steakhouse through the windshield. Somewhere inside, Chloe was still working, clearing tables, probably wondering if she'd done the right thing. She had. And Harold knew, tomorrow,